Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the EPP Group live on Instagram. My name is Kevin Purcell, and all going to plan, I'll be joined shortly by EPP Group MEP Esther de Lange. Good afternoon to you all. We're here today to have a chat with Esther about what's going on with COVID-19, what can be done once the restrictions are lifted, what can be done now, and we'd like your input too. So if you have any questions to ask Esther de Lange, she should be here any minute now. Please write them down here. We'll see what we can do and if we can get to them. So as I say, COVID-19 is the topic, the restrictions, the lockdown, how it affects you, and how it will affect the overall European economy if and once things get back to normal, hopefully at some time soon. And there she is, Esther.
Hi, guys. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see you, Esther. And thanks very much for taking the time to join us here on EPP Group Instagram Live.
Sure.
First off, how are you? How are you surviving? How are you coping during these unprecedented times?
Well, I'm personally fine. We're busier than ever, really, also because we're having to meet, of course, through virtual channels and, digital means. But I was on Breakfast TV in the Netherlands this morning, very, very early. So it was an early start. I'm fine. My thoughts are, for example, with my sister, who volunteered to work on in a corona ward in the hospital. She's an operation assistant, and she's the real hero of the family, really.
Yes, absolute hero, and many others across Europe on the front lines in hospitals, trying to deal with this. From your own, perspective, what's it like trying to work as an MEP from home? Is it more difficult? What kind of challenges are you facing?
Well, I guess for every parent in Europe, this is a challenge. I only have one 9-year-old. He's on Easter holiday now. But until last week, I was homeschooling him at the same time as having to, do my work. And I think for every parent, that's quite a challenge. And this is also why, for example, we in the EPP Group, in our plans on the response on Corona, economically, medically, but also socially, we have proposed that we should really develop an online schooling platform in Europe for those regions who don't have this yet. It's already hard enough to homeschool them, but the infrastructure and the tools should be there.
And as you mentioned, I suppose people are trying to work in their own jobs from home at the same time, looking after kids because they can't put them into childcare. And just generally as well, there's, I suppose, a huge mental strain on people just worrying about them, their families, their jobs. It's taking quite a toll on people.
Yes, it is. And that's why also in our EPP paper on the response to the coronavirus, we don't only talk about what we need to do medically, what we need to do for the economy, but we also underline the importance of looking after mental health. Really, every member state in the EU should have a strategy, how to inform people where they can find help if needed, and pay particular attention to vulnerable groups. In the Netherlands, for example, it came out that 7,000 primary school children have gone under the radar because teachers no longer have contact with them. They don't call in regularly. They don't reply to online meetings with their classmates. And they are often the vulnerable children who are not in a safe home environment, and we shouldn't overlook them. That's very important.
And of course, a lot more workers are being affected by all of this and the lockdowns, especially maybe the hospitality sector, small businesses, maybe behind on payments. Is there anything you think that can be done on a national level or on a European level even to try and help these small businesses?
I think we need action on all the levels, so regional, national, and European, because like you quite rightly say, these small and medium enterprises, they're the backbone of the European economy. Most people work in such a small or medium-sized enterprise. So we have national schemes, but what we're doing at the EU level is to try to help, for example, with the payments so that companies can keep paying their workers so they don't have to let them go. This is the SURE program of the European Commission. We as an EPP, we pushed for this. Look at the region of Milan, the region of Madrid, who are most hardly hit, but who we need to also relaunch the economy afterwards. So trying to keep these people in a job, even if it's partially state funded, this is what we need to do, and provide liquidity for small and medium enterprises through the European Investment Bank. Very, very important.
And a lot of countries are doing this, maybe paying 70, 80% of wages. I suppose the idea is to keep people in a job rather than unemployed, because hopefully, fingers crossed, they can go back to a job soon, hopefully.
Absolutely. That's the reason, if people are laid off, if they lose their job, the relaunch of the economy after this crisis will only be more difficult for all of us. And this really shows how we're all in the same boat. It's in all our interest to make sure that now we fight this virus together, but afterwards we relaunch the economy together. And you do that better if you try to keep as many people as possible in a job.
And relaunching the economy from an EPP Group perspective involves what you call a solidarity fund worth €1 trillion. That's quite a massive sum. Tell us about the fund, maybe how it is actually funded, and what's the idea behind it.
Yeah, this is a matter of, all levels fighting this crisis together, right? Like I stressed, local, regional, national, and European. And what we want to do at the European level, it consists of several things. There's, of course, the ECB, who's already announced measures worth more than 700 billion euros. Then we want this state-funded employment scheme, to keep people in work. We just spoke about that, the SURE proposal of the Commission. That's at least 100 billion. We want in the new MFF a Corona Solidarity Fund of at least 50 billion to also fight this crisis in the long run. And we need, the EIB to activate through more working capital, to be able to pay loans or give loans at very favorable rates to our small and medium enterprises. And if you add that up, you have an EU level acting, above 1 trillion in their full firing power. But together with the member states, we're moving towards 3. And these are really the kind of amounts that you need. Look at the US, they're at $2 trillion or something in that range. So we need the same firing power in the EU.
How does this all fit in with what's happening over at the Eurogroup? Obviously, there was no agreement overnight. They'll be back again, hopefully, with some sort of a deal. I suppose people at home will be wondering, thinking back to the recession and the austerity measures that came in various countries after that, will people have to take a hit? Will people have to worry about their jobs, pay cuts, that kind of thing once this is over?
Well, what people feel most strongly, and quite rightly so, is that this is not the same crisis as in 2008. That was an economic crisis. You could say, okay, maybe some countries were not prepared enough. They could have done more. There was a whole blame game going on. Are countries to blame or not? That was 2008. Now, clearly, nobody is to blame. This is something that comes from the outside. It is happening to us, and it is happening to all of us. So I find it completely understandable when my Spanish colleagues say, then the response should also be different. We don't want, as they call it, the same man in black, telling us what to do afterwards, like in 2008. We don't deserve that. That feels like being punished for a crisis that we didn't cause. And I think it's very important for the North especially to understand this. And of course, I come from the EPP Group. So as soon as this is over, I want to move back to a situation where we have responsible government financing and budgeting, and we have smart reforms so the economy is working. All of that comes later. But now we're fighting a war, and we need to fight it together.
So you're talking about a shared debt burden as opposed to member states maybe paying more than others, or trying to sort it out themselves.
Well, this is now what it's all about in the Eurogroup, right? The symbolic debate about like Eurobonds, yes or no. this is an approach you can take. You can also say, let's see what unites us. And what unites us is a lot. What unites us is to support the ECB in whatever it takes, is to call for more loans coming from the EIB to help our small and medium enterprises. It's access to the ESM emergency fund, clearly not with the same conditions as in 2008. I just explained why. This crisis is different. It's, a fund within the next budget that we want. All of that we can do together. So what hurts me is that in the Eurogroup, it seems to be very much about what divides us. Let's look at what unites us and fight this thing together. And this is, I think, the spirit of the EPP Corona response paper. We're all in this boat together. Let's stop debating and start working.
Speaking of working and the EPP Group Corona paper, just to break it down, we won't get too technical about the different measures, but one, you speak about collaboration between national healthcare systems. Maybe explain what this looks like, because from my understanding, is it not up to national governments to look after health in their own countries? Would it need some sort of changes legally, or how will it look?
Let me tell you a personal experience. My grandmother is 97 years old, and she is in an old people's home 5 kilometers away from the German border. And you know that old people's homes, care homes, they are often in very difficult situations now in this corona crisis. So we had an early outbreak of corona in Germany when we still had no outbreak in the Netherlands. But, her home is less than 5 kilometers away from where the German outbreak was. So we have a situation where Germany was already in full fighting mode, fighting the coronavirus up to the border. And there's my grandmother 3 kilometers further than that border in a country that is at that time saying, but we don't have any corona. This virus knows no borders. So we need to work together much better than has happened until now. I think the European Commission, they have done what they can. But competences are at the national level, unfortunately. And I understand that member states now have their hands full, fighting this crisis at home. They might not have the time to work out how to work together with their neighboring countries. But what we should do for the, next crisis, which will come, we don't know in what shape or form, but we need to have the protocols ready and the coordination hub, the structures, the infrastructure ready, so that coordination becomes an automaticity and not something that when you have time, you will do that too.
Yeah, it seems to be an issue that came up, I suppose, at the start of this crisis, maybe the lack of coordination. Another thing in the paper you mentioned as well is coordination when it comes to social distancing. There seems to be different rules in different countries about social distancing. You'd like to see a more coordinated response. Maybe can we do it now or in the future?
Well, at the same time, somebody rang my doorbell. So this is the homeworking, these are at least the companies that are, not losing from this crisis.
I know. I've ordered plenty, believe me. My door might ring as well because I've got loads of stuff on the way in boxes. But
and this is another point, by the way, okay, so this was a toy company, to spoil my son a bit, but you have companies actually cashing in on this crisis hugely. Like those guys doing the higher frequency trading at the stock exchange, they contribute virtually nothing to our society, but they make loads of money now because the stock market is volatile. And we also say as an EPP, they should contribute. They're cashing in, they should pay a high solidarity levy to actually also, have the money to fight this crisis. But you were asking something else about social
I was just going to mention as well, just as you were talking about it, about technology and almost upskilling. We're all trying to learn new things. We're live on Instagram, we're on Zoom, there is a sort of a positive aspect to this as well. We're becoming more technologically skilled as this goes on, as we try to continue as normal from our living room, really.
Yeah, really. And also us in the European Parliament, right? The first weeks were incredibly difficult because we found out that we had virtually nothing in place. And it's still difficult, when you're more than 20, 25 people to hold a meeting in terms of the technology that comes in, but also in terms of, everybody knowing what to do from a distance. It's not perfect yet, but at least we're learning. That doesn't mean that I would like to work from home 5 days a week. Also because our job is to find compromises. And sometimes it is best to be able to have a frank conversation, look each other in the eye, maybe have a bilateral talk one-on-one to find a way out. And I think this is maybe part of why it's so difficult also in the Eurogroup, right? They're all sitting there in the national ministry, can't have bilateral. So, it's good that we're learning, but human contact in the end is best in a way. Yeah.
Absolutely, and hopefully we can get back to it fairly soon. Just going back to some of the measures in the paper, social distancing, a coordinated response to that. Obviously, the rules seem to be different in different countries in terms of how far you're supposed to stand apart from people, how many people you're supposed to be out with. You'd like to see, it might be too late at this stage, but in the future, maybe a more coordinated EU sort of rule relating to it.
Absolutely, because I don't really care that much about whether you can go out with maximum 2 or 3 people, right? Those are details. But when the measures were brought in, for example, the closing down of the schools, in Belgium they were closed, in the Netherlands they were not. On the basis of the same scientific advice from the WHO, from ECDC, that was confusing people, confusing parents, and the ECDC advice said, we don't know for sure for this virus, but we know for all respiratory viruses that children don't really get sick, but they can spread it. And they spread it actually more than the average adult. And on the basis of that advice, the French, for example, I think quite rightly said, we will close the schools. But if you're a Dutch parent and you hear on the news Macron saying children don't get sick, but they can spread the virus, so we close the schools, and the Dutch government says, we will keep them open, you're insecure. And there's already enough insecurity because we don't know this virus. So I think that type of measure should be more coordinated. Also because you have cross-border effects that you don't want. Belgian people, when cafes are closed here, coming to the Netherlands, to party, or Dutch tourists trying to go to the Belgian coast. Let's not do that. Let's make sure that at least with your neighboring countries, you have one approach. And it's too late now for the introduction of the rules, but we will get the phase out. And let's not repeat this mistake with, when we're phasing out the measures. So I think it's, for example, good that the European Commission came out today with guidelines for the apps. Speaking about technology, a lot of countries are thinking about using apps to kind of tell you whether you've been in contact with somebody who has the virus. But if we all have our own national app, how do you do that in border regions? It's quite good that the Commission is already thinking about that. Let's hope member states are also thinking about that.
And we also, speaking of borders, saw some food delivery trucks being held up in various points because of the gridlock. Obviously, the borders were closed. I think the Commission introduced so-called Greenlanes to try and speed this whole process up. I think you might have more information that it appears to be easing at this stage, the gridlock with food delivery trucks.
They are working. It's very good that the Commission took that initiative, because you saw all these national initiatives on borders and not one line when it came to the external border of the EU. And the Commission introduced one strategy for the external border to kind of hopefully keep the internal borders open with these green corridors, etc. It didn't work immediately everywhere. We've seen the long lines on the Polish border, etc. But things are moving a lot better now. And I can confirm from my own experience this morning that the green lane between the Netherlands and Belgium is working perfectly. The trucks were going through. I was stopped, quite rightly so, by the Belgian police asking me what I was coming to do in their country. But the trucks were going, and that's the most important thing. We should try, in as far as we can, health first, but where we can, the economy should continue, especially for important things like food, deliveries of medical equipment, etc.
We just have a few questions before we start to wind down. Someone was talking about what you mentioned in relation to the online education platform. They want to know how that can support families. Maybe you have an answer for them on that.
Yeah, we're calling for the development of that, right? So it isn't there yet. And I think a lot of parents have found out that there's no infrastructure, there's no platform where teachers can actually post or learn from each other or exchange ideas when it comes to providing kids with work to do from home. So it isn't there yet, but we call on the Commission to develop it so that the next time we're better prepared, because the kids need to, well, first of all, you need to keep them busy, otherwise you go crazy yourself, but they have to keep learning. They can't stand still now for a couple of months. So let's hope the Commission picks up on this EPP idea.
Someone else was asking about solidarity, and I suppose brings me to my next question. I mean, this whole ordeal could redefine what the EU means or what it stands for. How important is it, do you think, that the EU seizes the moment, gets everyone to come together to try and fight this and resolve it?
I think in crisis times, really, that's the moment when you have to ask yourself fundamental questions, right? And one of the fundamental questions is now, where do I stand on Europe? Am I in favor of fighting this together? And then maybe the EU might not be perfect, but am I going to work in that direction, or am I going to try to wreck the place? If you look at the disinformation coming from Russia, or coming from parties within the EU even, the whole Italian aid issue, big announcements of Russian aid coming into Italy. Most of the masks were useless, by the way, that were brought in. And if you really add up all the support that came from other EU countries, that was much more. But there's also like a propaganda war going on between those who actually want Europeans to stand together here and those who want to use the crisis to break the EU up. I'm quite convinced about that. And then you can't say, oh, I'm a bit in the middle. No, you're either in the camp of the constructive builders or you're in the camp of the ones who want to wreck. It's very clear what camp I am in together with the EPP, but don't underestimate this because it's quite clear what is going on.
Do you think the union will come out stronger at the other side?
In my camp wins, yes. And this is what we constructive Europeans, even across the political divide, those who are maybe with differences, I think differently from my friends from the Social Democratic Group about what the right economic response would be. But we're working to make this EU a better place. And of course, in the end, we want to go back to being the Europeans that we always were. And that will be, this is what I maybe worry most about, right? Because we are now in this 1.5 meters distance community. Whereas normally Europeans were quite cuddly. If I hear my 9-year-old son say, "Don't share food," this is what he learns at school. Don't share food. This is what we do. We do tapas. We share food. That's being European, So in the end, after we fight this virus, I want to go back to being European and not be afraid of each other and having the society that we had before. That will take time, but it's worth a while, I think.
And for people at home watching this, I mean, we don't have the answers, but how long?
The Western Balkans, by the way, I see some questions coming up.
Yeah, answer away. Yeah.
On the Western Balkans, the Western Balkans, we paid a lot of attention to making sure that this response is not just EU 27, but that we do it with our friends and neighbors, and especially the ones who are closest by, like the Western Balkans, very important, but also Africa. We have a duty, and to help Africa fight this pandemic as well. They're not as well equipped as we are, and even we are struggling. So, they are our neighbors too. Sorry to interrupt, but I just...
No, that's fine. Just on that, the concern would be that things could be eased off, but there could be a second wave or a third wave, that this could maybe die down for a while and then come back at some stage. It's important that the measures are in place now to deal with it.
Yes, I mean, with viruses, this is what you would normally see. You would see a big hit, and then, once you ease, then the line is going to go up again. So it's not unthinkable that you get a number of waves, either because it slows down in the summer when it gets hotter, or because the measures are working. Thank God they are working. But if you ease them, you might have, the line going up again. We need a vaccine. This is what we need most. And this is why it's very good that the European Commission is supporting the research, that the European Medicines Agency, we pushed for it, but apparently they are also doing it already, doing fast-track procedures. To actually, once you have a vaccine that is likely to make it to the market, to speed up the procedures, make sure it gets to people quickly. All these things we need to do, because we will only be really safe if we have the vaccine.
Do you have any idea when people might be left out of their houses?
Well, it would be very unfair to give a date, because it's not us, it's not our agendas that determine that, it's the development of the disease. So unfortunately, because I'm looking outside to my terrace, the weather is lovely, but stay at home. The more you stick to the rules now, the quicker you're out in the end. We need to do this together. So bear with us a little while longer.
And have you any advice for people at home to maybe pass the time? Have you taken up any hobbies yourself?
Oh God, I wish I had time for hobbies, but the school teacher of my son had the brilliant idea to say the kids have to make a quartet game, the card game where you collect 4 cards of the same family. I don't know, I will spare you the details. He made one, but it's a game about a PlayStation game that he has, Skylanders. So all the animals he knows, I have no idea what these animals are. So I'm playing a card game about animals that I have no idea about, but he's enjoying himself. And it took him a day to construct this game, draw it himself, So be creative. That's all we can do.
Sounds good. Just before we go, someone asks when we expect a vaccine. We don't know really the answer to that question, do we? It could be another few months yet.
No, exactly. I mean, it might take up to a year. First, there were people saying it might be in the fall already. The scientists that I speak to say that's too early. 2 out of the 3 initiatives that are most likely to be successful. So the 3 best, 2 out of those are in Europe at the moment in terms of vaccine development. So we are good at this. It's important that we develop a vaccine not only for ourselves, but for the entire world. We're not Donald Trump. We don't just do this for ourselves. We want to serve the world with this. And we need it as quickly as possible, but I'm not going to put a date on it because I would only disappoint people. I'm grateful to the Commission that they're also, in terms of money, supporting wherever they can.
The questions are coming thick and fast now, just as we try and wind up. Just briefly, someone is asking what will be the role of the EU Medical Response Coordination Unit?
Yeah, several things, really. I mean, first of all, to make sure that people coordinate with each other. The name already says it. That sounds simple, but it didn't happen. Ministers met and they said, we will try to fight this together. And that lasted for 24 hours. And then everybody was doing their own thing. So this coordination is the most important thing. We would also like them to keep a live database of available IC beds. We are so grateful in the Netherlands to, for example, Germany, but also Belgium. But Germany has 107 IC patients from the Netherlands. To have a database of in real life of beds available across border, and to coordinate that's very important. The stockpiling is another issue. Indicating where there's shortages in material and actually making sure you have a reserve of them in case a crisis hits. Develop these protocols that I was talking about. It's good that we now have a virologist panel helping the European Commission. I would like these guys, when the crisis is over, to help us develop protocols, how to deal, in case A, you do this. In case B, you do that. This is what my sister does in the hospital. In the EU, we should also have that the next time a crisis hits.
Okay. I think we've covered plenty of issues there, Esther. So thanks so much again for taking the time to speak to us on EPP Group live on Instagram today.
Sure.
And best of luck, and hopefully we'll see you soon back in Parliament.
Yeah, that will be great. Have a nice day, all of you, even if it's
inside.
Thanks,
everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.